We have seen the futility of arguments made on YouTube because they ignore certain principles necessary to make a coherent argument. Primarily, they ignore the admission of biases by those making the arguments. We will now explain these biases in the hope that people will start to recognize them in their arguments, ways of thinking, and start to seek truthful answers themselves. Not just swallow the rhetoric they are fed. There are 12 main kinds of biases. Those are availability bias, anchoring bias, overconfidence bias, confirmation bias, missing evidence bias, causal bias, information imbalance bias, fundamental attribution error, historical bias, tunnel vision, mirror imaging and stereotyping. Availability bias is characterized by our minds simply looking for a shortcut to an answer. We tend to believe information that is more imaginable to us, and relies on our personal experiences rather than those we have no frame of reference for. You go for lunch to your favorite restaurant one day to find it is no longer there. Did it burn down, or was it beamed into space and stolen by aliens? The result is the same in that we can have our lunch there, but the first is more believable. So we discard the second without thought because it is unbelievable to us. We dismiss the unbelievable out of our bias. Anchoring bias is one of the more common and simple biases we can possess. It is our own stubbornness to change our minds. We have a theory, and we stick to it, no matter the amount of contradictory evidence we are presented. It is an inability to rethink our theories from the initial principle. Either because we are too lazy, we don't have time, or we don't want to believe anything different. Overconfidence bias is simply our own egos. We believe we are better than the others we are arguing or are engaged with. For instance, people's driving skills. Most people consider themselves to be above average drivers. Not everybody can be above average though by definition. It is just overconfidence in ourselves, and not willing to admit that others could be better, or more educated than we are in certain fields or endeavors. Confirmation bias can be measured in degrees as it were. We may simply choose to only accept information or evidence that can confirm our theories and ignore that which contradicts us. We may only look for evidence to support our theories and refuse to look for any that would refute our claims. Or we may go so far as to interpret new information in a way which supports us, to warrant its true meaning. Missing evidence bias is our tendency to interpret and interject data where some simply does not exist, or to simply ignore it. Here, for example, we see the section of a city separated into 4 quadrants, with information of how many coffee shops are in 3 of them, but no information for the last. We tend to look for patterns and assume them to be true. In reality, the number could be between 0 and infinity. This bias keeps us from knowing the answer or to lessen its importance. Causal bias is often called hindsight bias. We tend to abhor chaos and look to assign patterns wherever there are none. We need to have a cause for each effect that we can understand. Conspiracy theories often stem from this bias. Some people were and are unable to accept that terrorists in the middle of a desert would be able to mastermind and pull of the September 11th attacks, for example, and have decided to assign the blame and cause to an inside job from the government. Information imbalance bias is when we tend to believe the information which there is a ponderance of. We tend to believe something because more people are saying it. Truth, however, is not democratic, and just because most information reports it, does not make it true, only loudest. The shooting at Pulse nightclub, for example, Almost all media outlets reported the weapon as an AR-15 rifle when in actuality it was a Sig Sauer MCX. We believed it to be the AR-15 because it was said most often. Fundamental attribution errors are us thinking of ourselves differently from others. We do not view groups as the same as ourselves. In essence, it can be summed up with the cliché of your problems are your own fault, while my problems are the fault of somebody else. We envision ourselves as unique and special while not being able to admit that it's possible that others are so as well, or see themselves in the same manner. Historical bias is the train of thought that just because things were one way before, there is no reason why those things wouldn't be the same, or go the same way, as they did before. We assume that things will be the same as they were last time. Take vacations, for example. We all have expectations on a trip based on how things went the first time. The beach you loved years ago because it was so deserted is now the popular go-to spot. The truth is, it is never the same. We need to look at each experience individually, but this bias prevents us from doing so. Tunnel vision is simply the ignoring of all information that is not within the scope of what we are looking at. Refusing to see the bigger picture, and believing that what we are looking at is separate from anything else, or any other factors. In essence, it is a refusal to look outside of our scope. Mirror imaging is when we take our perspectives, beliefs and/or values and project them onto others. We assume that the way we see things must be the way all others would see things. This becomes increasingly troublesome when we look at others farther from our own beliefs. Most people see murder as wrong, and just assume that all others see it as wrong as well. This sort of bias is what allows us to think that terrorists must hate committing acts of violence because it is what we think and feel. It is the inability to see things from another's perspective in essence. Stereotyping can be a continuation of mirror imaging, but it is basing our opinions on what we think we know about others. Again, it is a refusal or an ability to get into the heads of point of view or others. But on top of that, it is used to dehumanize others. To place them in the box so we can dismiss them, belittle them, or ignore them. All Muslims are terrorists, all men are sexist, all black people are criminals and all cis people are transphobic are all obvious stereotypes meant to dismiss and dehumanize these groups. These are the types of biases which exist in all of us, and must be looked at and questioned within us and our arguments before dismissing any criticism out of hand, or worse yet calling it harassment. There is no way to ever eliminate these biases, but we can work to minimize the effects it has on us and be critical of our own work first, before calling any critique of us attacks and those who point out our biases to us as our attackers.